It's been told many, many times, and you've heard probably many sermons preached on it, so I'm going to go a little bit different with it. I'm going to talk about how this event has a lot to do with the foreshadowing of what Moses had done in the wilderness, and so there's a little bit of parallels. But first, I got to tell you this story. One day that Moses and Jesus decided they wanted to play golf. So they got another guy and they put together a threesome. And they went out there to the first hole, and now the first hole had this big pond that protected the green. So, the smart play is you kind of lay it up short, with an iron and then shoot on over the pond and go to the green. Well, Moses, he got up there, he pulled his driver out. He thought, I'm going all the way for it. So he gets up there and he, bam, cracks like a line drive right straight towards the pond. And it had a head of steam going. It was going to go right in the water. Well, he quickly lifted his driver over his head, and the water split, and that golf ball rolled right through the pond, right up the other side on dry land, and right on the fringe of the green for an easy chip. Now, Jesus took a look at that, and not to be outdone, he grabbed his driver, and bam, he hit this beautiful arching drive, but it was going to land right in the middle of that pond. But as it got close to the water, it stopped and started hovering over the water. So Jesus grabbed his wedge and walked across the pond and stood right next to it and chipped it about 2 feet away from the hole for an easy birdie. Now, the third guy, he gets up there, and he's seen what all these other guys did, so he grabs his driver too, and he takes a massive swing, but he didn't hit it right. It sliced way on off, bounced off the clubhouse, out onto the road, and bouncing down the road, a truck came along and hit the golf ball and knocked it right into the greenkeeper's shed there. And it got from the greenkeeper's shed, it bounced off the roof of that, hit a tree, and from that tree, it bounced off the tree, it hit a rock, and then when it hit that rock, it bounced straight in towards the pond. But it landed on a lily pad. So the ball's on this lily pad, this great big huge bullfrog jumps up, grabs that golf ball. But as he grabs that golf ball, an eagle flies down from the sky, grabs the bullfrog up and starts carting him away. And the bullfrog freaks out so much it just drops the ball, hits once on the green, and then right into the cup for a hole in one. Moses looks over at Jesus and said, "Have I ever told you how much I hate playing golf with your dad?" So we're going to have Moses and Jesus and God kind of in this story if you look at the parallels. Now, the interesting thing about this story is this is one of the only stories of Jesus that's actually told in all four Gospels. Matthew, Mark, John, and Luke all talk about the feeding of the 5,000. So there must be something important about it. Well, the resurrection was really the only other miracle that was listed in all four Gospels. Now, the feedback here. What is interesting is you look at the background of how this, what came about, is how this story started, and basically Jesus was in the second year of his 3-year ministry. When this story was written. Now, he had just left Nazareth, which we talked about that a few weeks ago, where the local townspeople tried to throw him off a cliff. So, he was not well accepted in Nazareth. And he'd been doing his miracles, and he'd been getting a little bit of a name going for himself. But just before this event happened, he gets the news that John the Baptist had been, Herod had beheaded him. So he lost his cousin and, kind of a ministry partner. John the Baptist was, he was doing a huge amount of ministry work in the area. And so he probably thought he needed a little needed a little vacation, just kind of get away from it all. So we're going to head out to the wilderness. Now, some commentators say that maybe Jesus headed off to the wilderness to kind of hide out from Herod because of what happened with John the Baptist, that maybe was going to happen to him too. But if you look at the place that he decided to go have his camp out at, was out in by Tiberias. Now, this is, Tiberias is the place where actually Herod had beheaded John the Baptist, and it was the place where he had his palace. It was right by the sea there. And so for him to go out to hide out, he wasn't going to hide out. He wasn't scared of Herod. He wasn't, because he knew his time hadn't come yet. But, so they were doing this kind of right in the area where this miracle happened, was right near where Herod had beheaded John the Baptist. Now, I don't know how the crowds all found out about his camping trip. I highly suspect that maybe Peter posted it on his Facebook account and they found out, or maybe it was on Philip's Snapchat account or something, that they found out they were having this big, he was having his little vacation here in the wilderness. Anyway, 5,000 people showed up, but that was only 5,000 men. Probably by the time you figure the women and the children and everything else, there could have been 15 to 20,000 people there. And John mentions this happened during the Feast of the Passover, which would kind of make sense because that's where you were getting all these people that were coming from, because they were all coming to the cities to celebrate Passover anyway, and they heard about Jesus going out there. Now, Gospel of Mark tells us that he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And Jesus had compassion on the sheep who had lost their shepherd, who was probably John the Baptist. There was a lot. John the Baptist had a huge following, probably one that was many followers as what Jesus had at the time. So these people were wandering around like, wow, what happened? John the Baptist is dead. We thought he was the Messiah. We thought he was the man of God. How did this happen? And Jesus had compassion on them. And the fact that it was also during the time of the Passover is also unique too, because this Passover would be like the 4th of July here in America. It was a celebration of independence, but with less fireworks. They didn't have any fireworks back then. So they were celebrating Passover. It was when they had their independence from slavery from the Egyptians. And just a brief synopsis of the Passover, okay, that's when Moses had gotten his call. He had got his call that God wanted him to be a deliverer for the people of the people that were in slavery in Egypt. Now, when Moses got his call, if you guys have ever seen the Ten Commandments, remember when Charlton Heston was talking to a bush? He had this burning. It wasn't George. No, it wasn't any of the bushes. It was a burning bush, and the bush was telling Moses that you're going to go into Egypt and you're going to tell the Pharaoh to let my people go. And why you choose me? Well, for one thing, Moses had a relationship with Pharaoh because he was raised in Pharaoh's kingdom. In fact, like Jesus, when Moses was a baby, the Pharaoh had ordered that all of the young males were to be killed. All the babies were to be killed. And Jesus, when he was born, King Herod ordered that all the male babies to be killed because he was afraid that there was going to be a heir, because he was told by the Magi that there was going to be a baby king born. So Moses escaped death by being put in a basket and sent down the Nile River, where he was found by someone from a princess who brought him into the kingdom to be raised as a pharaoh. While Jesus, he escaped King Herod by going to Egypt. So that's kind of weird. He went to Egypt, and Moses was trying to get him out of Egypt. But as he was going to that burning bush and was given those orders that you're to get my people go, he said, well, Mr. Bush, God, how do I tell people who you are? I mean, how do I identify that what I'm talking about, this real God that's going to set them free? And God answered him, you tell them that I am. I am the great I am. I am. And that's all you need to say. And that was actually translated into the word Yahweh, which the Jewish people was a sacred word. They wouldn't even speak it. And when they wrote it without any vowels in it. They would do that just because it was even too sacred to even write the name. So, back to Jesus. He was spent the day healing people and preaching to them and ministering to the people there, even though it was supposed to be his day off. Now, before long, it gets late, and Jesus asks Philip, where we're going to buy bread to feed all these people. And he said, how about if you just slide into Tiberias there and pick up some Happy Meals and bring them back for everybody. And so Phil, being the smart guy that he is, he gets out his calculator and starts figuring out 5,000 men times wives times kids. He goes, holy cow, Jesus, it would take 200 silver coins to buy enough, even if we got off the dollar value meal, we couldn't get enough people, enough money to feed all these people. I mean, if we were giving them chicken sandwiches, there wasn't going to be enough money to be able to feed all these people. See, he was looking at things through a man's eyes. He was looking at what he was seeing, and he wasn't seeing the big picture. He wasn't seeing the circumstances. Now, this is the best part of the story here, is this young boy comes up. Now, you just got to love kids. They have this, childlike faith. They can believe, they believe anything's possible. They haven't been spoiled by the world. They haven't seen so much with their own eyes. They can't believe that there could be miracles happen. He comes up with 5 barley loaves and a couple of dried fish. And he probably had heard the clamoring that they were trying to find food for all these people. And he goes, I ain't got much, but, Andrew, if you could take this and give this to Jesus, I'm willing to share what I have. And what the story probably, what they mentioned, the fact that it was barley loaves. This kid was probably really a poor kid. His mom packed him a little lunch, because barley at that time was considered the poor person's grain. Barley was typically only given to the animals. It was not a good grain. It was more of a something the poor people would have. So the fact that he had these barley loaves, that his mother went to all the trouble of turning barley into bread, meant that it was a very meager gift. It was very, very meager. It was not much. But yet he gave it to Jesus, and Jesus had it, and he said, okay, now I got something I can work with, because Jesus knew what he was going to do. Sometimes we bring our gifts to God. We think that, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I don't have I'm not a good talker. I don't know how to relate to people. I don't know Scripture good enough. But you just give God what you got. No matter how little it is, he can do an amazing thing with it. He can make a miracle happen. And that's what we're about to see happen. And that's what happened to Moses when he was in the wilderness. He was in the wilderness too, like Jesus was in the wilderness. He was in the wilderness with all the people that he delivered from Egypt. Because during that Passover, first they brought all these plagues upon Egypt. There was the frogs, there was the acne, and there was bloody rivers, and there was all kinds of plagues, and he wouldn't let them go. Well, finally the Passover happened, and that's when God instructed him to take the blood of a lamb and spread it across the doorposts of all the Jewish people. And when the angel of death came, all the firstborn males of the entire families, of all the families, all the animals, everything would die unless they had the blood of the lamb covered them. Well, when this happened, the people of Egypt just said, get these Jews the heck out of Dodge. We don't even want them around. It's cursed. All of our kids are dead. And all of our heirs are dead. We got nothing left. Even the Pharaoh's son died that night because he wasn't covered by the blood of the lamb. And so they left, and they left with all of the riches. They left with they plundered the Egypt without even having to raise a weapon. And so they left, and they were out in the wilderness, and they were hungry. They had no food. There was just nothing. You couldn't grow any food out there. And so God provided. He sent down manna from heaven. And this manna came down, they had to take and gather it up and have their breakfast. They could gather it up for the day, but it wasn't only good for just that one day, because by the next, you couldn't gather up and store it up for tomorrow because it would rot overnight. So that bread that was provided to them, that God only through His miracle, through His power, gave them more than enough. They were able to be provided for. Now, the number of the Israelites there, they figured there could have been millions of people, of these slaves that had left Egypt. It was out there in the wilderness, and God provided. God gave them more than enough to be able to get through that wilderness time. 40 years they wandered in the desert. And on this day, Jesus took these 2 fish and these barley loaves and was able to feed the multitude. Because Jesus had the apostles divide them up into groups of 50. And actually one of the other scriptures talk about dividing up into groups of 50. Now, that's kind of weird. Why would they do that? Well, maybe it was so that when the apostles wrote this story out, they had an accurate count of how many people were actually there. They wanted people to really know what a miracle this was. Now, as they distributed the breads and the fish, the apostles went around and distributed all, and they found out that they had, Jesus said, pick up the leftovers. How much leftovers do we have? They had 12 baskets left over, 1 for each apostle, I guess, for a souvenir. And the thing was that this bread didn't spoil after one day. This bread was eternal. You see, Jesus' sacrifice isn't just that one-day provision. It's a provision for your lifetime. The bread that He gives you is something that you can have forever. Now, the demonstration here was enough to electrify the crowd. They were convinced that this is the real thing. He is the Messiah. He was going to help us overthrow the Romans. All they needed to do was march up the river and depose Herod. We go right to Herod's castle. They had 5,000 men, fighting men. Let's go up there and we'll grab Jesus as king. We'll set Him up on the throne, and He will be our king, and He will then drive the Romans out of Jerusalem, and we will finally have Him. They were going to force Jesus literally to be His king. Now, I am sure that whatever Jesus was preaching about for those 4 hours had nothing to do with making Him the king and deposing Herod. Our kids and I just went down last Thursday and seen The Lion King play down in Lansing. So I don't think Jesus was singing, I just can't wait to be king, yeah, yeah. I don't think that's what He was preaching about. See, He knew His kingdom wasn't of earth, but these people, they hear what they want to hear. They tried to make a God in their own image. They wanted Jesus to be who they wanted Him to be, instead of taking Jesus for who He is. Kind of like you going to McJesus? Yes, I'd like a double Jesus. Could I have extra grace? That abundant life, could I have an extra order of that on the side? But hold take up your cross and die for me, and that kind of stuff. The for sacrifices and stuff. I don't want that. I want Jesus in the image I want Him to have. So Jesus departed off to the mountain by Himself. And the apostles, in this story, hopped in the boat and started heading on over across the sea over to the Capernaum. And in the middle of the storm, 3-4 miles out, they run into a storm in the middle of the sea. Really, it's a big lake. We know what big lakes are about around here. They call it the Sea of Galilee, but it was really a big lake that was surrounded by these mountains, and the wind could come in quickly. Storms would come in quickly over these mountains and just make this lake extremely turbulent. And so they were in the middle of a pretty fierce windstorm. It was rocking the boat. And Jesus came walking across the water. Now, Moses also had an encounter with the sea. When he was leaving from Israel with all the plunders of Egypt, or he's leaving Egypt with all the plunders that he'd gotten, the crowd was, the group of people he was leading was probably about 3 days out, and Pharaoh changed his mind. He was thinking, what the heck was I thinking? Man, my son's dead, and they're walking off with all of our stuff? He sent his army after him to go get him. And of course, if you ever watched the Ten Commandments, it's a great scene where Moses was able to have God provide them a way of escape. God provided them a way of escape by parting the Red Sea, and they walked through on dry land. And you see, that was God proving that He was the great I Am, that He had control over nature, that nature itself had to bow to Him. The laws of physics didn't apply to God. He was above that, and He provides. Now, Jesus, He come out, was walking on the water, and the apostles were kind of freaking out, thinking that it was a ghost or something. And He said but He said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." And according to translators, that actually could be reading, it could be saying, "It is I, Jesus," could have been also saying, "This is the I Am." He was stating to them that I am God, I am the provider. I give you more than enough. And this is why the story, I believe, is told in all four Gospels. Because through the loaves and the fishes, and the walking on the sea, and the calming of the sea, actually, in some of the other scriptures, they talk that He commanded the sea to be calm. Jesus is saying that I am God in flesh. I am our provider. I am the one who will give you more than enough. I will give you everything you need. See, because as Moses heard God identify Himself in that burning bush, that was the answer that God had given him, that He is the great I Am. So, this is my take home. There's a lot of important things, a lot of important truths you can take away from this lesson. But what I think is most important is that through God and through His Son, Jesus Christ, we have everything we need. In the Passover, they spread the lamb's blood on their doorpost to save them that one night from the angel of death. But you know what? Jesus spread His blood on this cross that we can forever be protected. We are forever provided for by His blood, that we can be not delivered from slavery of the Egyptians, but delivered from the slavery of sin. And that sin and death does not matter anymore by that blood of Jesus. And the other thing that I want you to really remember is the lesson that you learned from that little boy that shared his lunch with the people, that when you give something to God, He can take what little gifts you have. When you're saying to yourself, that I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not popular enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not anything, God can't use me. God will take whatever you give Him and make something amazing, make something powerful. Don't listen to what the world tells you. The world tried to tell Jesus that He was going to be a king on earth. And if He would have been, that would have lasted for, 20, 30 years, that kingdom, and it had been gone. But God had something better. When God is in it, He had something better. I'm going to make a provision for you that lasts forever to make you free from sin. So don't let the world tell you who you are. Don't let the world tell you who Jesus is. And I got my daughter, Elise, is going to come up and do a song that talks about what provisions God makes, and to listen to the voice of God telling you who you are.